Well, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trae Holiday. And as O said before the break, we are joined right now by the wonderful Sade A. Smith. Thank you so much for coming on to our platform today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's really important for us to always get kind of an inside look, and that's what this platform has really been good for, and really giving the audience, you know, an inside look into what's going on. We know that you have been an attorney, a lawyer, really representing these protesters who are getting arrested. So we want to get right into some questions that we have for you. Now, the city said that they are not prosecuting protesters for nonviolent crimes. Do you find this to be true in your experience?
So yes, the city has been declining to press charges, but I do think that there's something that needs to be established, that when they make a distinction with nonviolent, we have to recognize that this system is racist at its core. Its foundation is racist. And so even the distinction of violent versus nonviolent is going to have a disparate impact on BIPOC communities. So because they're saying nonviolence, like a lot of the assault charges that are of officers are getting bumped up to felonies, there's no evidence of those whatsoever. And so it sounds good, but it's not really as good as it sounds.
So do you feel that that's another one of those blanketed statements that kind of goes out there, but yet when you dig a little bit deeper, you're finding that there are these disparities that you just speak of?
Yes. The criminal system is very good at using really great language, like the 3 strikes law, right? It's like, oh, you know, people violate the law, get 3 strikes, they go away, and it's because they're such a danger to the community. Like, none of that's actually real. That's not supported at all by the statistics, not supported at all by the numbers, and it's not beneficial whatsoever as far as funding goes either. And so it's really important for a community to be really critical about what prosecutors' offices are putting out, what politicians are putting out about what's happening in the criminal system. So the fact that they are not that they're declining these charges means nothing. They're still allowing the cops to terrorize community who are literally just going out there and exerting First Amendment activity and their rights. So the cops are, when they engage in such brutality, even though charges aren't being filed, it still has the impact the cops want it to have, because now people can't go protest without gas masks. They can't take their kids. You know what I mean? Like, it is really scaring the hell out of people, and people are staying home, and that's what they want. They want everybody to think that it's like a gaslighting technique. Nobody's concerned about Black Lives Matter. Everybody's staying home. Everybody's, you know, like the protest or the movement is slowing down. It's like, no, you're terrorizing people to stay home. That's why things are slowing down. People want to be in the streets. So again, it's a critical analysis of what the behavior is, and it's not just about whether or not charges are being pressed.
I mean, wow, you're blowing my mind. So in that case, now, how many felony arrests and charges are actually out there?
Well, so what happens is SPD makes an arrest and they write these nonsensical police reports. I don't know if you guys have seen the PC search where there's copying, pasting, and putting a bunch of lies in them. And then people are booked usually over the weekend, because that's when the protests are happening. They have a hearing, and then the state or the city will decline to file charges. During that whole time, protesters are not given any information about what's happening. A lot of times, you know, when they're going to get their first call, what they're charged with, when they're going to be able to get out, what their bail is. It's a lot of like misinformation and lack of information. That's a power control dynamic of just like leaving people disoriented, right? And then they're locked in cages over the weekend. So it's really unclear. It's like there's been some that have been, hey, we want to file these as felonies, and then the state is declining to take them. But what happens, even if there's a decline, they still have the statute of limitations, which is 3 years. And so hanging over somebody's head is the 2 to 3 years, figuring out, or are they going to do it in the future? You know, there's body cam footage, you know, there's a delay because of COVID. What if something comes down the pipe later and they want to, you know, follow up on those charges? And then the arrest records, if they never decide to follow up, the arrest records exist for about 2 years after. And so you have to wait till all of this is wrapped up. So it doesn't just end with you being released from custody. It's still that overarching what's going to happen in the future. And that uncertainty, again, is terrorizing. How many people are like, do I want to be pepper sprayed, tear gassed by SPD and get the hell beat out of me? You know, spend the weekend in jail and not know what's going to happen. We had to hire another person in our firm just to track down property from protesters, because SPD is not either giving people's property back, there's stuff missing. I had a client who was in the media and her SD cards were stolen. Like, they're just gone. Stuff was all ran through. It's a hot mess. And so it's frustrating to me to see the prosecutors for both the city and the state to be like, oh, we're declining to file, it's not on us. It's like, no, there's a significant amount of action that they could take to demonstrate, one, that they're not supporting SPD's terrorizing of community in Seattle, and two, there's impact that they could do to make a statement. We're not supporting SPD actually in these arrests whatsoever. They're not doing that. They're saying we're not, filing on nonviolent offenders, blah, blah, blah. It's like none of the people out there are violent. And let's be very clear. Violent is crime that harms people. That is how it's defined in Washington state law. It's in the law traditionally. It's about people. So when they say violence and they're talking about property destruction, it's not the same thing. And there's a distinction because even the law can recognize that people matter more. And so that's just the reality that we're living in. And I do want to do a shout out to, I'm not just doing this by myself, my colleague Talitha Hazelton, and also the team that we're working with is really amazing. So yeah.
I mean, you are blowing my mind, because I think that what we see in a lot of, for me anyway, maybe it's just my world, but a lot of documentaries, right, that start to showcase a lot of the criminal justice system and a lot of the nuances that happen along the way. Exactly what you're explaining to us right now, so much of it is not in the public's mindset. So all we hear are those sound bites. Well, they're not, they're letting protesters go. They're not charging protesters. So we keep thinking, oh, they're doing their part. Yeah. But ultimately, everybody that's involved, like what you just described, they all understand these nuances that you're describing.
Exactly.
So for me, it sounds like, what we're seeing here, it feels like a lot of old normal practices. I want to ask, from your perspective, are you seeing any pioneers, anybody who's coming out to try to be innovative in this process?
Within the system?
Yes.
As far as prosecutors, so I do it, like the police cannot do what they do without the prosecutors signing off on it and without the judges signing off on it. So police brutality is a wraparound situation, and that's what's so concerning about this. Like, despite the courts knowing full well that SPD is flat out lying, and Talitha and the firm put together a briefing just to talk about, and it was on Spec's Twitter account too, just how many times they get caught lying and just making up statements. And it's like, we put that, it was like, you are using cop statements as taking in their affidavits as like to establish probable cause, right? To like, whatever they're making or saying is supposed to justify the arrest. At the end of the day, we know that they're just lying. So you can't use their statements, you can't take them as face value anymore. And I think that Seattle Times had an article with Naomi Ishisaka, I want to pronounce her name right, just pointing out that very fact, that every time we go into court, the PC statements from cops are taken as word. And it's like, first of all, this whole like uncovering that cops are lying in affidavits is not new. We've always known this. They've been doing this, and they'll just write whatever. And it's like, okay, cross-examine cops, and it's like, you just told 18 lies. Nothing happened. You go back to work, right? The cops who are arresting people, brutalizing people on the street. I mean, there's tons of video out. You guys know, obviously, you're part of the video too. So, and again, those people still get to go to work. So why is there no intervention by city government, by prosecutor's office? And this is what will happen. And bureaucracies will be like, well, it's not our job. Like the prosecutor's office say, we can't stop SPD. SPD, like SPOG, their unions, they support Dan Satterberg. They have always supported Dan Satterberg. That's why cops don't get prosecuted when they execute people on video. And so it's this whole like, it's like, well, our hands, we can't do it. It's like, yes, they can. And it's kind of like the conversation with COVID, right? Like the government was like, we can't hand out funds or support people, blah, blah, blah. We don't have the resources. All of a sudden COVID hits, trillions of dollars drop. It can happen. They have to want to make it happen. And so racism has been way more of a pandemic globally, historically, than COVID will ever be. Are they dropping the resources and the funds for that? So it's like, we cannot take what they tell us as truth, because it's not. Anytime they need something to happen, they make it happen. And we just have to hold them accountable in a way like, we see through your bullshit. We're not going to accept what you're giving us. We know that there's more, and you owe this to us. Like, this is a government established literally for the people. It is for the people, of the people. We have these amendments, and again, they were never intended to apply to BIPOC, honestly. I think people should really accept that. When the Constitution was written, 1787, all of that, we were not in the room. Most of us weren't considered people, so let's be very clear about what this is supposed to do. It was supposed to maintain white property-owning men's power and establishment. And so what the law has been continuously doing, and what policing started as, was protecting rich people's property, rich white people's property. And whether that was in the South, where it's like black people were considered property, or in the North where it wasn't, still it's about property. And then only afterwards, it was a private endeavor previously, and then it became a public endeavor when like they convinced the public that this is for a public good. But if you look historically in history, and like policing will tell on itself, it's very clear. It's always been about protecting rich property. And that's exactly why you see when there was a threat to property, all of a sudden people got tear gas. When somebody showed up at Jenny Durkin's house, all of a sudden shop got destroyed. So it's like, this is not the games that they play with words and how they're just making, oh Lord, it's really, it's overwhelming how much they lie and get away with. And then how everybody's hesitant to say that they're lying or that they're spreading misinformation. Like, this is cop propaganda, and that's continuously what it has been. Even the situation with Carmen Best, I started crying when I saw that letter, because that is so threatening to black children, and the disregard she had for them, and that she was just sitting there supporting people pulling guns on those children, protesting. And it's like, these kids are like fighting for their lives. This is not something, it's not Black lives in the future, it's Black lives now. They need them to matter now. We're still trying to close this youth jail. And they're saying 2025 or whatever like that, blah, blah, blah. It's placation. But at the end of the day, like, you cannot, as a police chief with your type of power and authority, sign on to this type of vigilante stuff that got Trayvon Martin murdered. So I find her offensive to the core. I find Jenny Durkin's activities offensive to the core. You do not tear gas people for protesting. I mean, like, they're snatching umbrellas. People with the arrests, they snatched off our clients, protesters' PPE, took it off, threw them in the back of unmarked vans with people who had been pepper sprayed, so everybody's coughing and hacking. People have been quarantining. Protesters are, for the most part, like, having masks on, doing things safely. They get in SPD custody, and it's like, oh, COVID, blah, blah, blah. And mind you, there was an outbreak at RJC, which is the facility in Kent, amongst the corrections officers. Within that outbreak, the King County Corrections Guild actually had a beef with Department of Adult and Juvenile Detention about the procedures and everything, because corrections officers weren't being protected. So if corrections officers weren't being protected, how do you think people who are in cages are being protected? So it's like the fact that they're snatching people up, throwing them back of trucks, mind you, for no reason, having them cuffed for 7 hours, people are beaten and bruised, shot point blank with munitions, faces like bruised up and smashed into the ground. I mean, one of our clients, Samantha Six, and she's obviously given me permission to talk about this. She's already given information as well. She was supposed to have life-saving medication. It was in her bag. They just lost her property. She's tracked her phone to the West Precinct. They keep telling her it's not there. And it's like, again, we had to get another attorney to do this. And so it's like, it's wraparound full-on brutality, not just from SPD, through when they get to the jail, how they're being treated and traumatized. We have multiple people who corroborated what Samantha Six's statements are regarding her treatment. She could have died, and they did not care. And so when we talk about holding police accountable, holding politicians accountable, it's the fact that they're only going to politicians' houses when this type of stuff is going on, and the youth know this. They know that this is how the treatment has been. And like, people are like, oh my gosh, this is how cops are, we're so surprised. Like, no, it's like, they were just doing this to BIPOC behind closed doors, or like, at night. People didn't care. But now it's happening to white folks in the street, now everybody can see it. And it's like, oh, we can't look away from it. So really think about holding them accountable in a way that even they don't think that they should be held accountable.
Well, oh my gosh. I mean, to be honest, my next question was going to be about treatment of protesters, and honestly, just through your depiction of some of what your people have experienced, some of your clients, I'm glad that she gave the permission to give that statement and give that narrative. I think so much of this, again, it goes behind closed doors. Yeah. We don't understand all of the nuance that really happens, and I think the subtleties of what you're describing, because again, everybody that's involved in this ecosystem of prejudice or whatever, they all understand and are aware. So my next question really for you is, what are normal people supposed to do now, right? Like, once we get this information, once we understand just how corrupt the system is, right? What can people that are out there protesting, fighting for change, wanting something different, what is it you say to them?
I say, Seattle has always surprised me. I'm not from Seattle. I moved here in 2013, and I was a public defender for 7 years, 5 of which at King County Public Defender's Office. And so my head was kind of down. And then, I got involved in the NAACP, and I started seeing what local organizers are doing. I'm just amazed, like King County Equity Now, Decrim Seattle, people are doing the work. And what happens is, people wake up and they're like, oh, I want to say something. It's like, dope, you want to say something, but learn history first, because people have been doing this for so long, and they know the language to use. There's so much information out there, and so much of our history has been erased, and how much we've been involved in movements for liberation previously. And so it's one of those things that's like wake up, follow the established groups as far as that are really involved in abolition work, because again, we're talking about, people are scared of not having police because we've never experienced an existence where an authoritarian actor was not telling us how to behave. But we don't need that. If community has resources, and this is just studies, statistics, if people have resources, there's a complete decline of crime. If people have access to support, they're fine. People struggle, and then you have a struggle response, which is, results in crime. That's a symptom of a greater social issue. But when we have lack of education, lack of healthcare, lack of shelter, abuse and trauma not going treated, then you have these social ills that people want to deal with. So again, if you want to stop this stuff, we need to defund these places, and we need to completely abolish them. And I say that, and I want to say that without any hesitancy, because Seattle Police Department has been under a federal consent decree since 2012. And they went out there and terrorized people for protesting. A baby got tear gas, or pepper sprays. Reform does not work. They've had the equity trainings. Everybody knows about this, and it doesn't work. And that's because at its core, and I do want to mention this, policing, there was a study called the Stanford Prison Experiment where, I think his last name is Zimbardo. He had volunteers who were attending Stanford come in, community members. And a few of them, half of them would play guards, half of them would play inmates. And they did this through the day, and then they go home at night. So they knew it was a play thing. What was established in the study is that even within those limitations, even knowing that this is not real, there was a huge amount of violence and trauma from the guards to the inmates. The inmates had numbers identified, no names, and it's dehumanization. And what you learn about people is that when you have a situation where there's such a huge power disparity, where one group has control over the other, you're going to have abuse. And it's not because people, particularly that are cops, are bad. It's because that's a human nature kind of thing. And to think that that can't be you is to be played. It can be you. But it's also, we need to recognize that the institution of policing is a power dynamic disparity issue, and there's no way that it's ever going to be healthy. And it's also very traumatizing for the people who are actually cops. And it's weird for me to say that a lot because I don't usually advocate for them, but it's there's a lot of domestic violence. It's 40% DV rate. It's just, ugh. The shit's not healthy for anybody. Everybody needs to get out. Cops can get new jobs. I know people are so committed to them, but they don't have to be cops. There's other things to do. And when we talk about when we move forward, what I love so much about this iteration of the movement is that we're talking about new things. Before, people were so married to capitalism, so married to the idea of policing, but we can see ways of doing it another way. And that is going to free so many people. And this is about collective liberation. We can't continue this way. It's going to continue to harm. So I would tell people to engage with the local community groups, read. If you can't, if you're not a big reader, there's tons of people like that, audiobooks. If you're not into that, there's tons of videos. There's so much media. Social media is so brilliant. It's so amazing. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. But yeah.
Educate yourself and get involved.
Educate yourself, yeah.
Wow, Sade A. Smith, man, thank you so much for educating all of us this morning, all of our audience members this morning. So much great stuff that just came out of you, and I think a lot of insight. So we really appreciate that. You guys, we are going to take a quick break. You guys are watching the Morning Update Show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.